And last but not least, it would not be a CPC roundtable without focus on a TLA, three-letter acronym for those of you unaware. Satyam speaking on work in progress reporting.
Awesome. Thanks, Dan. We had a great session. Dennis is really the expert here, and I didn't want to try to dumb it down for everybody. So we're going to let Dennis do the recap so that we can really get into the meat of what we talked about.
Well, I think the first 15 minutes or so aren't recorded anyway, so we'll need a mini recap of that anyway.
Oh, was that our fault or is that a
No, it
system
was
problem?
mine.
Oh, oh, okay,
I didn't see
okay.
the text because I was in virtual reality. It happens.
Gotcha.
I was
Gotcha.
immersed.
You were playing. Okay. Well, we had a good discussion. We spent the first 15 minutes really recapping what CPC and the surety XBRL working group has been doing for the last 6 months. And basically, what that is we have been researching the flow of data from that's required to prepare a work in progress report. And then once that is put together by the CFO of the and controllers of the construction companies, how that data is currently getting to the surety agents and eventually to the insurance companies themselves. And what we have learned over the last 6 months and confirmed actually was that it is happening. A lot of it is being done with Excel. And part of the reason for that is because the forecasting tools and the ERP tools are always not together. And a lot of companies forecast using Excel. Some companies do have the forecasting system in their ERP, and that allows for all the data to be kind of in one spot, which actually better positions us for creating a XML based file for the surety. But it's an exception right now that the ERP systems have that data. So we just kind of talked through that and what we're working on. Again, from the CPC perspective, our next step is we're working with the CFMA to get a survey done just to kind of finalize our findings. And then from there, we'll see where that takes us. But we kind of walked through that whole progress. Everyone agreed that, yeah, that's pretty much what is happening out there, and that there's a gap right now between the field capturing data and eventually that progress report or that WIP statement being prepared. So we kind of moved then into David and Lisa with ICT Tracker, talked about how their system allows for more accurate capture of progress, and they can do it through basically the BIM using a model and tracking the progress in the model. And a way that David used a word that I had just never really thought of it this, from this perspective. When people say doing a takeoff, I always think of the estimating process, and we're estimating quantities in order to estimate the particular task or work. So I'll do a takeoff to find out how many square feet that wall is so I can properly estimate it. Well, he used the word takeoff from the perspective of I'm going to take off the progress. And that was really a really, I never looked at it from that perspective. And that's basically what their tool does. It allows for the model to be, to diagram in the model what progress has been made, which then can translate into quantities, which then can feed further upstream into the cost codes and get into the percent complete, et cetera, et cetera. And so I believe we left the conversation and everyone agreed that it made a lot of sense. That one of the challenges though is not all the models are there. We're not using models everywhere yet, so we can't quite rely on that 100% as the only way to do it. But we all agreed that the more data we can capture on progress in the field and work that data through, the better the forecasts are going to be. And things are improving, but we've got some ground to go on. What Jeff was, who basically works for an MEP contractor, he commented that the way we talked about how it's being done was realistic. The PMs gather this data, they put it together. But then we got into a little bit of a conversation about, well, could forecasting be all analytics? And if we had more data, could the forecast basically be done just, more of a science and all just done for us with artificial intelligence, et cetera? And, Jeff commented that that could guide us, that could present us with guidelines, but the project manager really comes into play there. He's got to use his experience and maybe information that's not there to be able to adjust those forecasts. So that's a really critical piece. Then we had a little bit of a discussion around the subcontractor and the number of progress points that they capture and what the general contractor really is looking for. And we kind of went in almost full circle there, where at first we were saying, well, the GC, doesn't need all those progress points that the sub captures to forecast their work. But we also kind of concluded that, if they were all using the same way to measure progress, that additive data doesn't hurt the GC. It gives them just a better informed picture of what's going on. And so the general comment was that, yeah, there is room for definitely collaboration at a lower level of granularity between the subcontractors and the GCs, and then eventually that data, of course, is fed up to the sureties. So collaboration, and I think we all agree that's part of construction these days, and it's showing up in progress tracking as well.
Well, I think that's it. Thank you, Dennis. I think Dan had to run, so I'll wrap us up. I know we're a few minutes over, but you can already see, I think that the more you listen to our three technical groups, the overlap, the more granular you get, the more the lines start to blur between the groups. I can see Brianna laughing because it's so true that in order to get what you're looking for, Dennis, you have to achieve what Brianna's trying to focus on of the reliability of the scans, and all this at the end of the day comes together to that digital twin supply chain. So it's not one or the other. It's a yes and. But I will wrap. Go ahead, Brianna. Interoperability. Yes, it is no longer a deer in headlights word. It's okay. I actually know what that means, and that the shared pains is really around interoperability. So
model, they'll just change the dimension, move it 2-3 inches, and everyone's depending on that model location for putting sleeves in the wall. And now we just done a whole deck, and all the sleeves are off, halfway out of the wall. So typically, what we rely on, I'll be honest with you, is usually here's something that's released for construction. That's really what it is. Did you release it for IFC? And that's that level of detail. So we try and work with fabrication models more often than not, but we can still pull and use. It just depends what you're trying to track. There's some things that could be generalized and still be good enough. But if you're really trying to get gnat's ass on some stuff, obviously the better the model, the better the data.
Right. And where I'm coming from is that, as designers, we want to be able to engage and use or develop the best quality models ourselves, because we uphold the 300 law, which is LOD 300, right? So, but at the same time, there's detailed information that goes onto sheets, which does not require us to model everything, which may be a cost factor too. So that's where I'm coming from.
And the problem with the design world, I'll be honest with you, is the fact that you guys are everyone's running, trying to keep up the same level, but all of a sudden, boom, a line's set, and here's the architect's, okay, we're gonna put out a set of drawings out here, and everyone's scrambling to catch up with the architect. Meanwhile, he spent the last 2 weeks doing his updates there. So to turn around and say that we'd ever see, I've been on jobs where they say we want an LOD 300 IFC construction model delivered. And I said, I'm not trying to be unrealistic, but I'm just telling you just the way it works. Engineers and designers are running their ass off trying to finish all this stuff. So to get something out the door, it's more likely a detail is going to be missed. I mean, one of the things that's shortcut is the design schedule, right? Because every job I've been on recently is the first thing they do is they say, hey, we're going to whack 3 months out of the schedule. We're push everything up here. And we want you guys in, and going, well, we're trying to do coordination, and they're still on 50% design docs. So,
and if it's a GMP, all the more crazier. And thank you for answering my question, David.
So one of the things I was hearing there, and I've heard this, a key word that you said in your discussion, David, you used the word takeoff. Okay, and in a real simplistic way, takeoff to me is the measurement of something to get quantities. So, when I'm estimating a job, what I believe happens a lot is that the estimator will use both 3D models and they will use 2D to complete their complete takeoff, depending on the quality of the model. And if the quality is there, then they might have to go to 2D. But the key point there is they're using that more electronic method to get more accuracy on the quantities. And what I'm hearing you say is the same concept applies for measuring progress. If I can measure progress off the model and it can truly, and I can color, I can point to the walls that I got done, or I can point to the hangers that I got complete, I can get a better level of accuracy on the number of widgets, units complete. And the same thing would be true where if I didn't have it in a model, have you ever seen them go into 2D and kind of tracing the 2D to get progress quantities or production quantities? Have you seen that happen?
Yeah, that's traditionally how it was. It was on paper, and then people started doing it with PDF.
Yeah.
And you just highlight PDF, and softwares like Bluebeam allowed you to, put a number to it to identify this was a linear foot number, and this line represents all copper pipe up to 1.5 inches.
Mm-hmm.
But the labor factor is different. That's the problem. You do stuff like that. So if I turn around and say, here's 400 feet of pipe, I go, what was it? Was it black steel? Was it copper? Was it cast iron? Was it 2-inch? Was it 6-inch? And that's the difference. The model has that data. That line doesn't necessarily have that data. That's kind of that's the factor I've always seen. And and I can tell you just from our standpoint, we do a lot of companies, a lot of different databases, and everyone sees the industry a little bit different. Mm-hmm. But they still get their job done. And so the real thing is how to wrangle that data. And we do a lot of cleanup on the data. There's a lot of things that we look for that to make sure the data is correct. Because if the data is bad, no one's going to trust what we do.
Sure.
And I think the same in anyone's in this business right now. You love technology until it fails, and then everyone says, "Oh, give me a pencil back."
Mm-hmm. Let's see here, Jeff. You're here representing the contractor, and Himal, you're representing the contractor. How do you guys get your forecasts or your progress tracking to the people who can then use that to figure out what I've got left to do, so I can figure out what it's going to cost me when I'm done? How do you guys do that today?
So, I mean, you mentioned in your slides that you see a lot of the contractors forecasting that outside of their ERP. Our company, we actually forecast inside the ERP. So our project managers, the ones that are owning the job and are responsible for it, are the ones that are forecasting it. And that usually, happens with them walking the job and going out in the job and working with the foreman and doing the quantities comparisons that like David's talking about.
Right.
But the thing is, though, is you have to be careful about completely automating it, because you always need that human intuition value, because we've always it comes through experience, but you realize that 90% of your work is in actually the last 10% of the job.
Yeah.
So you can't really just completely forecast it based on quantities, because a lot of the time is wrapped up in the last 10%. So
sure.
You have to be careful with that. We have rules, and we found that there's a sweet spot in, like you said, breaking down those jobs according to cost codes so that you can forecast it more accurately. You don't want that cost code to be too big, and you don't want it to be too small, because then it's unmanageable. So
exactly.
We have some standards that we set up those jobs so that we can forecast it more accurately based on those codes like Dave is talking about.
Do you have logic in your forecasting? There was a gentleman I met, it must be 25 years ago. And one of the things he said, he kind of iterated on what you said, that and it was primarily labor that he was looking at. And he said that, if we're doing our forecasting and we figure we've spent 10% of the dollars, and they look at the dollars and they say, well, we spent 10 to 15% of the dollar. He said, if we're in that range, we just use our estimate because we don't have enough experience yet. But once we hit 15%, then we switch into more of an analytical approach where we really look at the production, we look at the productivity rates, and then we forecast that out based on the actual dollars being spent. So they figure out their hourly cost, and for all intents and purposes, they re-estimate it using actual labor costs. And then as they get but they don't do that into their like 15 or 20% of that particular line item. Is that kind of what you guys do? It sounded like.
Yeah, I think you hit it right on the nail, right on the head there. You really can't even start forecasting it until it's about 45 or 50% complete.
Yeah.
I mean, before that point, you just don't have enough intuition to know how the job's going to go. And then even when it gets to be like that 50% complete, even if you have an area or code that's going better, then you realize, especially if you're on like a 30, $100 million project or whatever, still got years to complete. You don't want to realize those profits then. You're gonna I mean, just like David said, you're gonna sandbag it, you're gonna pull off those profits. You might realize it on that code, but you're not gonna realize it on the job because there's a very good probability that the job could switch fortunes down the road. And the worst thing that we've been taught as project managers is you don't want a wave going on in your forecast. You want something more linear. So if you're way up high one month and then way down low the next month, it kind of shows the surety people and everyone that you don't really know what's going on your job. So
how much in this little screen, one of the things that a lot of the systems are, I've just seen in forecasting is that there's an analytical part to it, which is the science part of it. It's, figuring out productivity, doing math and all this kind of stuff. But then you get to that point where that project manager has a gut feel. That project manager knows more, meaning there's a huge change order that we're maybe working on that's not even in here yet. So I've got to put that into the mix. Is that a pretty common practice you see where with all the science that we can do and all the numbers that we can do, we still have to have that ability for the PM to kind of use his gut, use his experience to adjust the number? What's your reaction to that?
Oh yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. I mean, that happens all the time, especially in today's environment with as fast as jobs are going. It's not like it was, 30 years ago where you have a full set of plans, we're putting in underground before they're done designing the job. So,
That's interesting.
I mean, so there's a lot of intuition there because it's not a perfect world like everyone would like to see where you have a job fully designed before you're starting to put it in, starting to put pipe up in the air. I mean, we're still getting changes, even when we're doing overhead roughing, so that makes it really, really complicated on us to be able to forecast when the architects and engineers are still trying to make decisions on, what's going on here. I mean, we just experienced it, huge on a hospital project we recently did because the changes happened midstream because of everything that's going on in COVID. The owner decided to switch streams and retool and that you got to have that human intuition aspect in that situation. You can't automate something like that.
But it sounds like you also support and agree with, looking at the tool that David and Lisa have. Part of the purpose of that tool is to provide more accurate data. That the more accurate the data is, that's also a very valuable tool as well. I mean, if you didn't have that, you had to rely on your gut totally, or you had to rely on someone going out and looking at it and saying, well, I think I'm about 20% done on that. Having a little bit more supportive data to show how accurate it is, that's a good thing.
Yeah, I mean, absolutely. I mean, it's just like your industry and what you're doing. The more data that you have, the better decision that you can make. You know, it's the same, but you can't just automate that decision. You know, you can have the computer,
Guide you.
guide you and give you recommendations. But at the end of the day, you got to add in experience with that and make that call. And so, absolutely, yeah, David's tool is pivotal to giving that project manager more information. The more information he can have, the better informed decision he can make, and
Yeah.
so
Got it.
You can also go all the way back to, I think it's your next slide where, this is more field, but a lot of folks that are capitalizing on the data that's captured in the app take it all the way to their CFO. So it was a diagram.
Oh,
It was
I got you. I
where,
got you. Right
you know what
here.
I'm talking about right there. So I was thinking when we were starting the conversation about how do we get it to go earlier, because the CFO is capturing the information from the field and the PM to gather this, and most of it is. This is funny. One of our clients said, "Well, we just take wild ass guesses." So Jeff, you can probably relate to that sometimes. But so now the CFO is consuming the data now. So
Yeah.
I think before we were looking at, well, how does the field get it? How does the PM get it? Oh, now how do we get it in the ERP? Oh, and how does the leadership of the company consume this data so they can get it into this WIP? And so
Yeah, I think that great point. And one of the things, and I actually have it depicted here. Notice these little two guys sitting up here, CFO sitting
Yep.
right next to the PM, and they're in a WIP review meeting.
Right.
And I've had the opportunity to sit in on a couple of those, and they're really interesting. They're kind of the companies that I think are more successful. They really do team up on this, and it gives the opportunity for the controller and CFO just to be engaged. But I've also seen kind of this is what you were getting at, Lisa. If I only have the opportunity to kind of see that once a month, where there's work going on daily, if I can see progress on a little bit more daily basis, I'm going to probably maybe get some of my questions already answered before month end when I'm in a crunch.
Absolutely.
And so I agree that timeliness of that data, it's kind of like the surety waiting for his reports. If he doesn't get them but once a year, well, there's only so much that data is only going to be so valuable to him. But if he was getting them monthly, it's going to be a lot more value.
Daily, yeah. For us, it's way more frequent than that, and
it's daily.
Yeah, it's daily. So yeah, they don't have to go back. I mean, they obviously have meetings on a regular basis, and they say, well, where are you at? And so they're trying to complete this on a much more frequent basis. And yeah, I feel like if you've waited a year, it's just a little too long to make a decision on how you can shift or pivot. So
exactly. And usually, talking with Robert and Dixon and those guys, what they have to do is they have to request if a bond requirement comes into play on a job and they don't have current data, they're not going to take that risk. They're just going to have to ask for data, and hopefully they can get it quick enough in order to get the decision made, to get their bid together or whatever, however they're working that particular job. So timing is of value, no doubt. Okay.
Dennis, can I just point something out here?
Sure.
Bruce here. So we see a couple other things that come into this process. The first is that the forecast itself should be automated for the project manager and can be projected for them. Like, again, if you're less than 15 or 20% done a cost code, then use the estimate, then go use the actual and go project the final cost, and then the project manager would have to override it if there's a mistake in the projection because something's just way off. So you can make the forecast. The project manager shouldn't have to do that much work if the system can do the forecast work for them, and that's really important. And we got a lot of experience with that. And then the other thing is that on the WIPS report itself, we see the team leaving the project manager's forecast alone, but the CFO has the opportunity to dial down the profit recognized so that we don't get the waves. So there needs to be a slot in that WIP report for the CFO to act. We have it as the recognized profit percent complete. The CFO can dial it down if he or she says, I just don't want the waves. So
Hey, Jeff, did you see that last concept in practice? So if you were, in a discussion with the finance CFOs guys, where they're kind of looking at that number and they're kind of, Did you ever get into a negotiation on that where they would say, is it really gonna, isn't there more cost involved there? Don't you think we should bump that cost to complete a little bit because they want to reduce that profit or reduce the percent complete?
It can go both ways, yeah. But it's definitely always a
Yep.
negotiation, But I think, one thing I was thinking as Lisa was talking, the tying in the units and the actual tracking with the model, like David and Lisa
Right.
are talking about, is it does provide accountability to that project manager as well, because if their units are tied into the ERP system and it's automatic, then all that information is tied right there with his forecast. And so if the units percent complete don't line up with what his forecast percent is complete, it's a red flag for the CFO or the CEO to say, hey, is this right? Does he need to go back? Did he miss a forecast this month, or is he doing his job? So it's a really good accountability mechanism as well.
To check and balance. Yeah,
Yeah.
to check and
Well,
balance.
a fascinating lesson learned for us was the fact that units is one thing. So ducks are a really great one because some companies are pounds or some are pieces, but the company talked to their pounds companies never had the option to look at pieces. 2,000 pounds left of duck to put in. Is it 50 pieces or 15 pieces? So what you think it is a lot different than what, you just think it's 2,000 pounds of duck. What does it make up doing? So the fact we give them pounds, pieces, and linear feet, even though their estimate could be by pounds or pieces, they see all the different metrics to be able to make those adjustments.
What you're getting at, what I heard there was the value of that takeoff, and that takeoff having more intelligence behind it. And again, we're not taking off for the purpose of how many quantities do we need to build this thing. We're doing the takeoff to say how many quantities have we done, which ultimately says how many quantities do we have left. And that's where you get your forecasting. But point is that you just hit on, again, the more data points you have, and this is where I was commenting on Bruce's comment, is the more data points you have, the more accurate a system can predict. The fewer data points you have, they can't. And I always use this example is, okay, we budgeted $10,000. We spent $80,000, or we budgeted 100,000. We spent 80. Are we over budget or not? Well, I don't care who you are. You can't tell. If you budgeted 100 and you spent 110, I can say I'm 10,000 over. So my cost of completion is the wrong way by $10,000.
Right.
Or I used that example, 80,000 and 100,000, and I'm 50% complete. Well, just little math should tell anyone that it ain't, we got problems. And so getting that little bit extra data, and sometimes it's just a little bit more, makes the ability for a system like the one that Bruce talked about better predict. But and that's where your tool really is helpful.
Yeah, I think in addition to that, we have some general contractors that are actually using the tool to make decisions around their schedules and their budgets. So they may have a BI report that has all trades on it. And so what they do is they're putting this up in a trailer on a screen, and they're measuring percent complete on all trades. But what they'll do is at the beginning of the week, they'll ask each trade contractor, where do you think you're going to be at the end? So I'm going to be 20% complete, or I'm going to be at 30% complete. And then at the end or the beginning of the following week, they'll say, okay, well, you said you were going to be 20%, but you're really only 15. So did you accurately project, did you under project? Did you over project? You know, what's your true capability? And there they create a little sense of competition,
Sure,
if you would,
sure.
in the trailer. But I think for them, they're looking at it as a like an account, like Jeff was referring to, like an accountability tool. But
Sure.
key is they were actually trying to take the data from the model and from the installation tracking process to create some accountability for the trades too. So, I mean, not everybody likes to be seen that way, but for them, this was a pretty significant hospital project, and they really, really needed to be on schedule. So, and
Yeah.
on budget. So I think
Yeah, and then you know that same level of data, and again, data is can be used many different ways, but that also, of course, gets into their progress billing. And well, we're both in agreement that you're only 50% done, so you can't bill me at 70%.
right, and that's why it's so
Yeah.
significant even for pay apps. So here you know we're taking it way further than just you know this right here. You know, ours is linking into the pay app. So you know, can't overestimate. We have the proof.
So here's a question, and I have this discussion with Nathan all the time, and in that if you're Jeff, and Jeff's the MEP contractor, okay, and you're Lisa, you're the general contractor, and you ask him how far you know are you going to get done, how many touch points are you asking him about? How granular do you ask him? Because
Yeah, I
his granularity, he might have 100 different percent completes he's looking at. But
right.
how many would you as a GC want to know?
Well, the GCs don't tend to go as granular as a sub.
Yeah, obviously as a
I
trade.
agree.
Let's
I
ask the
agree.
GC in the room, Hamza.
I was like, I want to say it depends, but I know that's not a real solid answer for you.
No,
Yeah.
every GC we dealt with, if they're self-performing, they're all over it. If they're not performing, it's just a generalized tracking.
It's a generalized tracking. Yeah.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so it's that when, you know, if Jeff says at the beginning of the week, okay, we think by the end of the week, we're going to be at 40%. That might be 20 different tasks on his schedule or on his list, but it somehow gets collapsed into one when he gives that one number to the GC.
Right, unless they're all using the same model-based tracking program.
Yeah,
right?
yeah. Then it would be easier. Then
creating a standard, right?
yeah. Then it's easier.
Really
Okay.
ideal. Then there's no fudging in that.
Yeah, well, if I can jump in here, this is Hamza with Haskell. And I mean, great discussion so far. But I mean, for us as a GC, most of our work is subcontracted, right? So we don't do a lot of self-perform. We have a very small concrete team, but that's pretty much it. And we have some project managers that are always on top of tracking, right? And making sure that we have the right data. Some are just like, as you said, generalization is like, yeah, this seems to be like 30% done and whatnot. But I think like where we come in, so I'm working at a separate group, just evaluating new technology. And we're looking at how do we take the schedule, right? And break it down, kind of change that paradigm, right? Instead of going into an Excel or sticky notes on a wall somewhere, how do we get that data on a schedule-based platform that you can break down each activity, each like, you know, a schedule or just do like second floor concrete, right? But how do you break it down into specific tasks and assign those to the subcontractor? So the foreman have access to that tool and reports back on it as they're working, either daily basis or a weekly basis. And of course you can put some you know, gates and checks and balances there where the superintendent can verify and approve such measures. And that kind of will start getting us a lot of streamlined data that is more reliable. That's you know, something that you can rely on. Another thing, and just since I'm rambling here, we've been talking to Carta. So Carta is a great solution out there with scanning on a regular basis. That kind of becomes a little bit more costly and time consuming, and you have to have dedicated resources to run that. And we're working with a view as well that you import all of that, scan on a weekly basis compared to the latest model, and get your percentages, so to say.
Yeah, interesting. The one of the companies that kind of does what you were talking about there, where the tasks, the subs kind of say, okay, I'm done with this, or I'm done with that, is that actually happens quite a bit in the home building industry, in the production home builders, because the production home builders, they'll take a, let's take a plumbing contractor. I've got rough in, I've got top off, and I can measure what percent complete I'm done on those. And they just ask the sub to say, tell me when you're done with that. Now, of course, those are 3 and 4 and 5 day tasks compared to month-long tasks. So it's a little simpler, but they provide that check-in tool to the sub to give them the feedback. And I was talking to a framing contractor just this morning. They do multi-unit framing, and he says, they have in place a methodology, and they basically subcontract all their labor out. So their subcontractor labor gives them that percent complete. And then he said, but we also need a spot where we could enter the percent complete as well. And that's done by their superintendent to kind of keep 2 sets of eyes on it. But if we had a way to accurately measure it and they both use the same method, we wouldn't have to have 2 sets of eyes on it. So interesting. Okay. Satyam, how are we doing on time?
You're muted.
We've got about 9 minutes left, guys.
9 minutes left. Okay. One would just more of an FYI type thing. One of the things, and this again is simple exchanging of data. One of the things we're working on with Dixon and Patrick, another kind of use case where we just want to exchange data, is that quite often a general contractor will require a subcontractor to get a bond. And there's a concept of when they get that bond, they can get a bond validation number. And once you have that bond validation number, there's methods out in the industry where if I gave that bond validation number to Patrick would be able to validate that it's a valid bond and then provide a bunch of other information. And so we're actually working on a project right now where the general contractor gets that bond validation number from the sub and enters it into their system, and immediately it sends a surety agent who says good bond or bad bond, because sometimes there's fraud in the industry where it's really not a good bond or it's not a bond at all. And so that was another real simple example of surety exchange of data with the contractor, kind of for a totally different purpose, but another area of interoperability that we're working on.
And Dennis, if I can just pitch in on, since this topic is about the work on hand report, when we go to our underwriters with a contractor's backlog and the work on hand report shows their cost to complete or whatnot, now with the bond validation number being in the system, we know which of those subs are bonded, and we can identify in the work on hand report what the risk is for the portfolio and how much of that risk is bonded off to our transitioned off to bonded subs.
Sure.
So it really helps with the underwriting, provide a much clearer picture of the general contractor's risk on a portfolio.
Yep. All right. Any other kind of feedback or topics? Do you think the industry is making progress here? In this whole concept of field capture? Field capture to, go ahead.
It's Pat McGinty. The industry really is making a lot of progress, and we're more from the owners, obligee community. They're racing to get caught up with digitization of the surety industry. I thought it was going to take 5 years. COVID-19 has accelerated it tremendously.
Yeah.
So you're seeing a lot of dimensions: construction software, surety software. Dixon had a nice little write-up the other day about, traditional surety bonds versus an electronic surety bond, which is basically a representation in a PDF form, to a digital surety bond. And it ties right into the contract. Physical paper is not generated. A physical instrument is not generated, but it's more like a distributed ledger. So everybody's got the original data, and that's what's controlling the process, not somebody having to read through the bond form and make it default generated legal action, whatever.
Which is, just making this data electronic and consumable.
Yep.
Once we kind of continue that mission, and I agree with you, Patrick, I think the industry is making progress, and sometimes the cost of the progress might be a little expensive, and I'm not a BIM expert by any means, but a lot of I've heard comments saying, well, to build a good model, it costs money, and I think I've heard that there's more and more acceptance by the owner to want to spend that money because they will get a more quality product, they will get a better product, they'll get a better on schedule product. So I think your comment about the owners driving some of this is really interesting, and I think that the more they are willing, because it costs, there is cost there, and I think as the tools get better, the cost will drop. But we don't see BIM on all projects right now, and I'll guarantee you that BIM is probably on all the jobs submitted to sureties on work in progress reports. 2-3% of them have BIM models with it, but in a year from now, it's going to be 4%. In another line, it's going to be up to 15%. So
what's really interesting, Dennis, is the departments of transportation. They're already 90% electronic bid bonds, because you can imagine of the 200 and some odd DOTs, maybe getting 10 bids per whatever project they want to do. The paper would overwhelm almost anybody. So it's all electronic. What's coming into play is the final payment performance bonds are now becoming electronic, because there's nobody there at their office to receive the bond, check it out for validity.
Sure, interesting. Yeah, I think that, pandemic type events like we're experiencing is definitely causing changes, and government regulation will cause changes. Dixon's on top of that big time, and he's pointed out numerous cases where legislation is gonna basically say some of this stuff has to be electronic, and it's gonna force the industry to have to make that change. Definitely.
And the cost actually drives down.
Yep.
With more units, it gets less expensive per unit.
I agree. All right,
2 minutes left, guys.
How much?
1 minute 50.
1 minute left. Well, I'm going to look at my notes here because I've got to recap what the heck we talked about for 45 minutes here, and I think I've got enough here to think about. But thank you everyone for participating in this. I got a fair number of continued hope that the field wants to improve their forecasting, more quality, help them, and that just leads to better quality data in the financials, which leads to our ultimate goal here is to bring these projects in on time with as little risk, as reduced risk as we can. So data is one of the pathways to reduced risk.
Awesome.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool.
Be good to revisit this in like a year and see the real changes here. So
it will. Yeah, it will. Uh-oh. Yeah. Mr. Biden is talking on the TV right now.
Yep.
I'm suffering from election fatigue.
Yeah.
So but I do have to run. So,
Yeah.
thank you, everyone.
Thank you, Patrick.
Now 30 seconds, it'll kick us all back into the main.
It will all kick
Okay.
us back here. I'm going to stop my share here. We could look at Satyam. That's a pretty cool picture behind you.
Home goods.
Oh, I thought it was some great piece of, very expensive
nope.
art, huh? Nope.
Well, this piece is brought to you by.
This piece is brought to you by, yeah.
It's cool. Show us the whole thing while we're here and we have to transition. So.
Well, I think your background there, Lisa, is pretty cool.
Creative. Yeah,
Your
that's our-
background there is pretty cool.
That's all the industries that we're dealing with. I was trying to figure out how to get out of the picture, but
Yeah, that's cool.
Yeah, we probably should put the logo on the top left or right.
I know.
Yeah.
Should I stay over this side or, oh yeah, I always go left versus.
All right. See you
All right,
guys.
Thanks so much. Enjoy
Thank
the
you.
conversation.
All right.